universities in the UK should terminate agreements with foreign countries if academic freedom and freedom of speech are undermined. That's according to a key government advisor. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Ben Jones, who's Director of Case Operations and Outreach at the Free Speech Union. Ben, thanks for joining me. What do you make of this?
I think there's a lot to welcome in this guidance, which will govern how universities have to respond to the Freedom of Speech Act that's coming into effect later this year. The particular points about the danger of a reliance on international students, I think, is a very astute observation. I think also when the guidance is talking about foreign countries in the abstract, that clearly, I think, is code for China and for the dangers, as has been pointed out elsewhere, of Confucius Institutes and so on. And as
Tell
I said,
us about Confucius Institutes, because
on...
Ben, I think a lot of our viewers and listeners won't know what those Confucius Institutes are. Just tell us a little bit about them.
They essentially pose as being forums for educating people about Chinese history and culture, but they are accused very credibly of going so far even as to steal academic research and for distorting how universities teach about China and the sorts of research about China, for instance, about Chinese human rights record, can be done. So there is a real danger here. And if I may, this isn't something that is merely theoretical. At the Free Speech Union, we have been helping in the last 6 months an academic at UCL called Michelle Shipworth. She asked students on her module to analyze data on the prevalence of modern slavery in China today. And at the end of the seminar in which she did this, a Chinese student said that that was a provocative question. Complaints were made against Michelle Shipworth over a number of months, including by academic colleagues of hers, including by some Chinese students. And as a result of this, her department kicked her off her own course and said that she could not teach it because the university needed to make sure that it was commercially viable. That's a direct quote. For Chinese students. So this isn't a theoretical danger. This is something that really is happening. We have seen already universities distorting their core mission so as to avoid offending the sensibilities of the Chinese state.
Many of the universities, I agree with every single word you've just said, Ben, by the way, and I think that's absolutely outrageous. The universities would say that the bottom line is very important, that they've been underfunded for a long time. The fees for a UK student have been frozen since 2017 at £9,250 a year, whereas the Times Higher Education Supplement says international students can pay between £10,000 and £26,000 for their fees every year. From the commercial viability of universities and the fact that they're trying to make things add up, that is, in some cases at least, absolutely interfering with their missions, as you say. But from their perspective, some people wouldn't blame them.
I think one of the ways in which it's useful to think about this is to flip the equation on its head and think about the perspective, for instance, of a Chinese student who has come to Britain seeking a Western Enlightenment education in the small L liberal tradition, who comes to university, comes to UCL or another institution in the UK, and is expecting to be able to challenge ideas, to have debates in seminars and so on. And how dispiriting it must be to get to your university, to start your course, and then find, as in Michelle's case, that the academic who's teaching you is being punished for the most trivial of offences in terms of their teaching about or around China. And I think that the distinctiveness of what the university sector in the United Kingdom offers is worth preserving. And I think that's worth preserving for philosophical reasons, but I actually think there are commercial reasons for preserving that as well, because we do have a brilliant higher education sector in the UK. And I think if it chases after Chinese student fees to the exclusion of all of its other responsibilities, it's letting itself down. It's also letting down those Chinese students who do want to come here and study and be exposed to different ideas.
Because we can't stereotype Chinese students. Many of them may, as you say, want to come here for the liberal, tolerant, free speech, freedom of thought ideas that make Britain great in many, many ways. And this is not just about saying no to foreign students, perhaps. It's about saying no to foreign money from various different aspects that are not just students. We've seen, as you correctly pointed out, those Confucius Institutes. We've seen other parts of the universities have been given huge amounts of money by China. And when we move into a sort of more American idea of endowments, of donations, of even graduates giving money to universities to sort of keep them afloat, how can we kind of solve this? Is it just more government money? Is it raising raising the fees for home students, which I'm sure many people, especially in a cost of living crisis, would be very, very annoyed about. We do saddle students with a huge amount of debt in this country. How do we square the circle in terms of the finances?
Well, it's a massive set of questions. And in some ways, the arrangements by which international students pay fees that effectively subsidize home students is quite a clever way of funding the university sector. But that cannot be at the expense of sacrificing academic freedom and freedom of speech and compromising the central mission of British universities. And I think that is the position that you get into if, for instance, as at UCL, 1/4 of your entire student population is Chinese students. I think you do expose yourself to a risk where you are having to be overly and inappropriately deferential to the demands of one market and particularly to one state. I do also want to pick up the point you just made about not wanting to stereotype Chinese students. I think that's really important. And I think it's quite clear to me that, for instance, in a seminar where you have one Chinese student, I think they actually feel quite free to speak their mind and engage in classroom discussions. But I think from what I've heard, there is a different dynamic if you have a seminar with many Chinese students in which they do not know who might be reporting back what they're saying, who might make complaints, and what people's political views are. And I think that there is a phenomenon, in fact, I know there is a phenomenon of Chinese students feeling silenced by their compatriots and feeling unable to speak out. So this is a situation that I think is letting down everybody. And it's right that the Office for Students has warned about the danger of this.
Yes, this is Professor Arif Ahmed. He's Director of Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom at the Office for Students. He said many universities and colleges in England have international arrangements, including admitting overseas students on scholarships and hosting institutes partly funded by foreign governments. How much do we know about, just finally, those foreign governments per se, rather than perhaps private funding richer students who can afford to go abroad? Could there be, I don't want to be too conspiratorial about this, but could there be the Chinese state, for example, sending students specifically with a mission to undermine academic freedom?
I think we see that, and we have seen in the last decade at least, a full spectrum of activity from outright theft of academic research to widespread use of various plagiarism techniques, including falsified references to gain admission into universities and corruption of that sort. So we see a full spectrum. And then we see Chinese students who do just want to come here and study and get a good degree at the end of it. But unfortunately, the susceptibility of universities, particularly to Chinese money, is having a corrosive and I think corrupting effect on the entire sector and on freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Ben, thank you. Keep fighting the good fight. Appreciate your thoughts on that. That's Ben Jones, who's Director of Case Operations and Outreach at the Free Speech Union.